Well, welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. I'm here with Yaakov Lapin, and he's a research assistant for the Alma Research and Education Center, but also with the Patreon Lapin Assessment, where people can get all your information. Here we are, and we had a fascinating panel about, like, are we going from a Middle East that has had a Shiite axis to a Sunni axis? What do you say?
Well, in Syria, that appears to be what's happening, because what we saw is the collapse of the Assad regime, which was in many ways the heart of the Iranian Shiite axis. They were using Syria both to smuggle large quantities of arms to their proxy. In Lebanon, if you look on a map, what the Iranians actually set up was a kind of crescent. So they had control of Iraq through their Shiite militia members. And in Syria, they had a major ally in the Assad regime who was dependent on them because they injected tens of thousands of Shiite militia members into Syria to help the Assad regime survive the civil war, the original civil war. So they gained basically full dependence by the Assad regime on Iran. And then they exploited that to start building a war front against Israel from Syria. Right? So they used Syria both to set up military bases, set up terrorist attack bases, rocket launch bases, cross-border invasion spots. They were doing all of that, and they were using Syria as one big smuggling route, which we heard today in the conference. You know, we saw the maps to get an array of missiles, rockets, and very threatening capabilities to next door Lebanon and to Hezbollah. Right. Now, when Assad collapsed, first of all, the reason he collapsed is because of what Israel did to Hezbollah, right? Because this is all one axis and each component was helping the other part of it. So Hezbollah was basically the main ground force for Assad. When Assad was in trouble against the Sunni rebels, he called on both the Iranians to help him and Hezbollah. And so when Hezbollah was very seriously damaged by Israel, the Sunni enemies of the Assad regime saw their opportunity, and they broke out of Idlib, where they were kind of locked in, backed by Turkey, and got all the way to Damascus. And now we know, the rest is history. Syria experienced a very sudden revolution, and it stopped being the heart of the regional Iranian Shiite axis, and suddenly came under the control of Sunni, largely fundamentalist forces under al-Shara. This is a revolution. We try to understand where this is going because al-Shara, as you know, is now trying to market himself as a moderate, as a former radical, and he's being accepted throughout the West. We saw President Trump meet with him. We saw President Macron host him in Paris in very surreal images. This is a former al-Qaeda commander in Syria, and now he's being welcomed as a veteran statesman. So Israel is a lot more skeptical about this so-called transformation, and for good reason. There's no question that Syria has gone from being the center of the Iranian Shiite axis to becoming the center of a new Sunni Islamist axis, which is backed by Turkey, backed by Qatar, but there are also other players trying to get in on the act.
Saudi Arabia,
the UAE, those are the moderate Sunnis. So within this Sunni takeover of Syria, there is actual rivalry between the Muslim Brotherhood aligned forces and the real moderates, who are the Saudis and the Emiratis. But when we're talking about Syria, definitely the, let's call them the Islamist-linked forces. They're the ones with the upper hand right now in Syria.
So final question. So would you say this represents an opportunity for Israel, the idea that maybe they could join the Abraham Accords, or does this represent a major threat to Israel?
So we're not out of the woods when it comes to Syria. The advantage here is this: we're in the post-October 7th reality. And so Israel is now involved in a very different approach in which it is being proactive. It's not trying to figure out the intentions of its enemies anymore, or potential enemies. It's looking at capabilities. And it has established red lines, geographical red lines, saying there will be no threatening militias, rockets or missiles moving south of Damascus. Israel is telling the al-Shara regime and the Turkish government, we're not going to try and figure out your intentions. You cannot come into southern Syria, period. And that's a very big change. This is something that Israel never did under the Iranian era, the Shiite era of Syria, and it's something that it's doing now. And it's doing it successfully so far. The question is whether this will continue or not. I think it will, but that's basically where we're at.
Well, like you say, a revolution's going on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yaakov Lapin.
Sure thing.